At 72 years old, I thought I'd earned the right to expect a little gratitude from my children. After all, I'd spent 47 years building Gray Industries from a small accounting firm into a multi-million-dollar financial consulting empire. I'd sacrificed weekends, holidays, and countless family moments to ensure my 3 children would never want for anything. Private schools, college tuition paid in full, down payments on their first homes, luxury vacations, expensive cars. I'd given them everything money could buy and then some. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What I didn't expect was to be sitting in my lawyer's office on a Tuesday morning in October, listening to my eldest son Marcus tell me I was nothing but a burden to their lives. The words still ring in my ears like a death knell. Mom, face it. You're old, you're alone, and honestly, you don't have anything to offer us anymore except money. And frankly, we're tired of pretending we enjoy spending time with you, just to keep you happy. My name is Bernice Gray, though everyone's called me Bernie since I was 12 years old. I built my fortune the hard way, starting with a $1,000 loan from my late husband Robert's insurance policy after he died suddenly of a heart attack when our children were still young. Marcus was 15, Diana was 13, and little Tommy was only 9. Instead of wallowing in grief, I rolled up my sleeves and turned our tiny family accounting practice into something that could support us all. Those early years were brutal. I worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week, learning tax law, business regulations, and investment strategies by candlelight after the children went to bed. I taught myself everything from corporate finance to real estate development, building a client base one satisfied customer at a time. By the time Marcus graduated high school, Gray Industries was handling accounts for half the businesses in our city of Millbrook, Connecticut. But success came at a price. I missed school plays, soccer games, and parent-teacher conferences. I hired nannies and housekeepers because I was always at the office or traveling to meet potential clients. When the children complained about my absence, I promised them it would all be worth it someday. I was building their future, securing their inheritance, making sure they'd never struggle the way I had after Robert died. Marcus showed early promise in business, so I sent him to Harvard for his MBA. Diana had artistic talents, so she went to Parsay for fashion design. Tommy was brilliant with computers, so he got his degree from MIT in software engineering. Each education cost me over $200,000, but I paid it gladly. These were my investments in their happiness. After graduation, I offered each of them positions at Gray Industries. Marcus joined as Vice President of Client Relations. Diana started our new creative marketing division, and Tommy became our Chief Technology Officer. I thought we'd finally be the family business dynasty I'd always dreamed of. For a few years, it seemed to work. We had family dinners every Sunday at my estate in Millbrook Hills, and I felt like all my sacrifices had finally paid off. But as the years passed, I began to notice changes. Marcus would show up to work late and leave early, delegating his responsibilities to junior staff while he played golf with his country club friends. Diana spent more time planning her next vacation to Europe than developing marketing campaigns for our clients. Tommy would disappear for weeks at a time, claiming he was working on revolutionary software updates that never seemed to materialize. When I confronted them about their work ethic, they'd dismiss my concerns with patronizing smiles. "Mom, you're old school," Marcus would say. "Business doesn't have to be your whole life. We have balance." Diana would add, "You need to learn to delegate, Mother. Trust us to handle things our way." Tommy, the youngest and most blunt, would simply shrug and say, "The company practically runs itself now. What's the point of stressing about every little detail?" What they didn't realize was that I still reviewed every account, every expense report, every client contract that crossed their desks. I knew Marcus was padding his expense accounts with personal purchases. I knew Diana was using company funds to finance her designer wardrobe. I knew Tommy was billing the company for equipment that ended up in his personal home office. But I said nothing, telling myself these were small indiscretions that came with family business dynamics. The first real crack in our relationship appeared 3 years ago, when Marcus got divorced from his wife Jennifer. She'd been like a daughter to me, and I was devastated when she told me Marcus had been having affairs throughout their 10-year marriage. During the divorce proceedings, Marcus asked me to hide assets in offshore accounts to avoid paying Jennifer a fair settlement. When I refused, he accused me of choosing her side over his. "Blood should be thicker than water, Mom," he said coldly. "I expected you to have my back, but apparently money matters more to you than family loyalty." I was stunned by his twisted logic. Protecting marital assets from legal proceedings wasn't loyalty. It was fraud. But Marcus couldn't see the difference. To him, my refusal to break the law on his behalf was a personal betrayal. Diana's rebellion was more subtle but equally painful. She began bringing boyfriends to our Sunday dinners, who were clearly only interested in her trust fund. These men would spend the entire meal asking pointed questions about my business, my investments, my estate planning. When I expressed concern about their motivations, Diana would fly into theatrical rages about how I was trying to control her love life. "You can't stand the thought of me being happy," she'd scream. "You want me to be as miserable and alone as you are. You're just jealous that I have love in my life and you don't." The accusations stung because there was a grain of truth in them. I had been lonely since Robert died, and I had thrown myself into work to avoid dealing with that emptiness. But I wasn't trying to sabotage Diana's happiness. I was trying to protect her from men who saw dollar signs when they looked at her. Tommy's distancing was the most gradual, but perhaps the most hurtful. He simply began to fade out of our family gatherings, claiming he was too busy with his own tech startup on the side. When I discovered he was using proprietary Gray Industries software as the foundation for his personal business, I felt like he'd stolen a piece of my soul. I'd taught him everything he knew about business development, and he was using those lessons to compete against me. When I confronted him about the ethical implications, he laughed it off. "Mom, you can't own ideas. Besides, your company is ancient. You're still using systems from the Stone Age. Someone needs to drag this family into the 21st century." The final straw came last month when I received a letter from the IRS indicating that all 3 of my children had been claiming me as a dependent on their tax returns for the past 2 years. This meant they'd been receiving tax benefits for supporting me financially, which was absurd since I was the one who'd been subsidizing their lifestyles with generous salaries, bonuses, and gifts. When I called a family meeting to discuss this fraudulent behavior, they acted as if I was the one being unreasonable. Marcus rolled his eyes and said, "Mom, it's just paperwork." "It's not like you actually need the money," Diana added. "We take care of you emotionally and socially. That's worth something, isn't it?" Tommy simply shrugged and said, "Everyone fudges their taxes a little. It's not a big deal." But it was a big deal to me. I'd built my entire business on integrity and ethical practices. The idea that my own children would commit tax fraud using my name was devastating. I told them they needed to file amended returns immediately and pay back any fraudulent refunds. That's when Marcus dropped the bomb that shattered everything. "Or what, Mom? You'll cut us off?" Face reality. "We're adults with our own lives now. We don't need you anymore. We're only here for Sunday dinners because we feel sorry for you. You're old, you're alone, and honestly, you don't have anything to offer us anymore, except money. And frankly, we're tired of pretending we enjoy spending time with you just to keep you happy." Diana nodded in agreement. "It's exhausting trying to keep up this charade. You want to know the truth? We discuss it all the time. How you're becoming more difficult, more demanding, more paranoid about every little thing. We're not children anymore, Mother. We don't need your constant supervision and criticism." Tommy, not to be outdone, delivered the final blow. "Maybe it's time you accepted that your usefulness as a parent ended when we graduated college. Now you're just there, taking up space and expecting us to be grateful for things that happened decades ago." I sat there in stunned silence as my 3 children, the people I'd loved and sacrificed for my entire adult life, systematically dismantled 47 years of devotion with the casual cruelty of strangers. They weren't just rejecting my help, they were rejecting me as a person. According to them, I had nothing to offer beyond my bank account, and even that came with too many strings attached for their taste. Marcus leaned back in his chair with a satisfied expression. "Look, we'll still come to dinner sometimes, and we'll call on holidays. But let's stop pretending this is anything more than obligation. You write the checks, we show up and smile, everyone gets what they want. Just don't expect us to act like we're one big happy family anymore." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of Robert's antique grandfather clock in the corner. I looked at each of my children's faces, searching for some sign that they understood how deeply they'd just wounded me. But all I saw was impatience, as if they were waiting for me to accept their terms so they could get back to their real lives. That's when something inside me shifted. The loving mother who'd spent 5 decades putting her children's needs before her own began to die, and someone harder, colder, and infinitely more calculating took her place. If they truly believed I had nothing to offer except money, then perhaps it was time to show them exactly what life looked like when that money went elsewhere. I stood up slowly, smoothing down my skirt with trembling hands. "Thank you for being so honest with me," I said quietly. "You've given me a lot to think about." Marcus smiled, apparently relieved that I wasn't going to make a scene. "Good. I'm glad we could clear the air. Now, about that quarterly bonus distribution." "We'll discuss business matters at the office," I cut him off. "This was supposed to be a family meeting, but since you've made it clear that we're not really a family anymore, I think it's time for you all to leave." Diana looked surprised. "Mother, don't be dramatic. We didn't mean—" "You meant every word," I said firmly, "and I heard every word. Now please go. I have some thinking to do." As they filed out of my dining room, chattering among themselves about my overreaction, I remained standing by the window, watching their expensive cars pull out of my circular driveway. Cars I'd helped them buy, driving on roads that led to homes I'd helped them purchase, filled with furniture and electronics I'd gifted them over the years. They were right about one thing. I was old. At 72, I probably had at most 10 or 15 good years left, but they were wrong about everything else. I wasn't useless, I wasn't desperate for their company, and I certainly wasn't going to spend my remaining years begging for scraps of affection from children who saw me as nothing more than an ATM with legs. That night, I called my attorney, Richard Hawthorne, who'd been handling my legal affairs for over 20 years. "Richard," I said, "I need to make some changes to my estate planning." "Significant changes." "Of course, Bernie. What did you have in mind?" "I want to restructure everything. The business, the trust funds, the inheritance arrangements. All of it. And I want to explore my options for charitable giving." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's quite an undertaking. May I ask what's prompted this sudden decision?" I looked around my empty dining room, at the table that had hosted thousands of family meals, at the chairs where my children had once chattered about their dreams and aspirations, back when they still valued my opinion. Let's just say I've recently learned that my current beneficiaries don't appreciate what they have. I think it's time to find people who will. "I see. Well, there are certainly options available to you. Charitable foundations, educational scholarships, community development funds. The possibilities are extensive. When would you like to meet to discuss the details?" "Tomorrow morning," I said without hesitation. "And Richard, I want to be very thorough about this. I want to make sure every dollar goes exactly where I intend it to go." After I hung up, I poured myself a glass of Robert's best scotch and sat in his old reading chair, looking out at the gardens he'd planted 30 years ago. The roses were still blooming despite the October chill, their red petals bright against the darkening sky. Robert had always said that the most beautiful flowers often bloomed just before the first frost, as if they knew their time was limited and wanted to make their final moments count. Maybe it was time for me to bloom one last time, but not for the ungrateful children who thought I had nothing left to offer. I was about to show them that a woman who'd built an empire from nothing still had a few surprises left in her.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
If they wanted to see me as just a checkbook, then I'd make sure that checkbook was the last thing they'd ever see from me. The next morning, I arrived at Richard's law office with a yellow legal pad covered in notes I'd made during a sleepless night. I'd spent hours going through my financial records, calculating the exact value of everything I'd given my children over the years. The total was staggering, Over $2 million in direct gifts, plus their salaries and benefits from the company, plus the trust funds I'd established for their futures. Richard, I said, settling into the leather chair across from his mahogany desk, I want to establish the Robert Gray Memorial Foundation for Promising Young Entrepreneurs. I want it funded with the majority of my estate, and I want it to provide grants and low-interest loans to young people starting their own businesses. Richard made notes as I spoke. That's a wonderful legacy, Bernie. What percentage of your estate were you thinking of dedicating to this foundation? 80%, I said firmly. Richard's pen stopped moving. 80%? That would be approximately $40 million, give or take. What about your children's inheritance? They'll receive the minimum required by law to prevent them from contesting the will. $1 each, with a clause stating that any attempt to challenge the will results in them receiving nothing. Richard leaned back in his chair, studying my face carefully. Bernie, this is a very significant decision. Perhaps we should take some time to think it through. Family dynamics can be complicated, and sometimes things said in anger. This wasn't said in anger, Richard. This was said with complete clarity and honesty. My children have informed me that I have nothing to offer them except money, and they're tired of pretending to enjoy my company. I'm simply taking them at their word. I spent the next hour outlining my plans in detail. The Robert Gray Memorial Foundation would provide startup capital for young entrepreneurs who demonstrated both business acumen and strong ethical principles. Recipients would be required to mentor other young business owners and give back to their communities. It would be everything I'd hoped Gray Industries could become, a force for positive change that valued character as much as profit. I also want to establish scholarship funds at Harvard, Parsay, and MIT, I continued. The Bernie Gray Scholarships for students from working-class families who demonstrate exceptional academic achievement and community service. Full rides, including room and board. And the company? Richard asked. Gray Industries is worth approximately $15 million. What's your plan for that? I'm selling it. I've already had preliminary discussions with Harrison and Associates. They've expressed interest in acquiring our client base and our proprietary software systems. The sale proceeds will go directly to the foundation. Richard was quiet for a long moment, tapping his pen against his legal pad. Bernie, I have to ask, have you discussed any of this with Marcus, Diana, and Tommy? They are currently employed by Gray Industries. This decision will affect their livelihoods. They're all capable adults with college degrees and years of experience. They'll land on their feet. I kept my voice steady, but inside I felt a savage satisfaction at the thought of my children scrambling to explain their sudden unemployment to their friends at the country club. There's something else, I added. I want to accelerate the timeline on all of this. I don't want to wait until I'm dead for these changes to take effect. I want to see the foundation up and running, the scholarships awarded, the business sold. I want to spend my remaining years actively involved in giving my fortune away to people who will appreciate it. That's admirable, but it's also irreversible. Once you've transferred assets to a charitable foundation, you can't get them back. Are you absolutely certain about this course of action? I thought about Marcus's sneer when he'd called me useless. I thought about Diana's accusation that I was jealous of her happiness. I thought about Tommy's dismissive shrug when I'd confronted him about stealing my software. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Over the next 2 weeks, Richard worked with a team of financial advisors and tax specialists to structure the transfers in the most efficient way possible. The Robert Gray Memorial Foundation was established with an initial endowment of $5 million from my liquid assets. The scholarship funds were set up at all 3 universities, with enough money to fund full scholarships for 50 students per year in perpetuity. Meanwhile, I moved forward with selling Gray Industries. Harrison and Associates offered $12 million for the complete acquisition, including all client contracts, intellectual property, and physical assets. The deal would close in 30 days, contingent on a smooth transition of operations. The hardest part was keeping all of this secret from my children. They continued to show up for work every day, blissfully unaware that their positions were about to be eliminated. Marcus had already started planning his Christmas vacation to Aspen. Diana was designing the spring marketing campaign for our biggest client. Tommy was upgrading our computer systems with expensive new equipment that would soon belong to Harrison and Associates. I felt a twinge of guilt watching them go about their routines, but then I'd remember their casual cruelty during our last family meeting. They'd made their feelings about me perfectly clear. They didn't want a mother. They wanted a benefactor, and soon they'd have neither. The first crack in their oblivious facade came when I didn't show up for Sunday dinner, the week after our confrontation. Marcus called my cell phone around 7 o'clock, sounding irritated. "Mom, where are you? We're all here waiting." "I'm at home," I said simply. "Well, are you coming? Diana made reservations at that new French place you like." "No, I don't think so. As you pointed out, these dinners are just obligation for you. I've decided to spare you the burden." There was a pause. "Look, if you're still upset about last week, you're being ridiculous. We were just being honest with you." "Isn't that what you always taught us to be?" "You're absolutely right. Honesty is important. That's why I'm being honest with you now. I have better things to do with my time than sit through meals with people who consider my company a chore." Marcus sighed dramatically. "Fine, be dramatic, but don't expect us to keep begging you to join us. We have our own lives." "I'm counting on it," I said, and hung up. The next Sunday, none of them called. Or the Sunday after that. It was as if they'd decided to call my bluff, thinking I'd eventually cave and come crawling back, desperate for their attention. They had no idea that I was spending those Sunday afternoons visiting potential scholarship recipients and touring community centers that could benefit from foundation grants. During the week, they continued to treat me with the same dismissive politeness they'd always shown at the office. But now there was an underlying tension. They sensed something had changed but couldn't quite put their finger on what. I caught Marcus watching me suspiciously when I had long private conversations with Richard over the phone. Diana seemed puzzled when I started clearing personal items out of my office. Tommy noticed when I stopped approving his equipment purchases and began asking detailed questions about every expense. "Mom, you're being weird," he said one afternoon when I refused to sign off on a $5,000 server upgrade. "Since when do you micromanage every little purchase?" "Since I realized that attention to detail is what separates successful businesses from failed ones," I replied. "These servers will be someone else's problem soon enough." He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing you need to worry about," I said with a smile. "Just focus on doing good work while you still have the chance." The confusion in his eyes was delicious. For the first time in years, my children were paying attention to me, even if it was just to figure out what I was planning. They'd grown so accustomed to taking my presence and support for granted that any deviation from the pattern made them nervous. Diana was the first to voice their collective concern. She knocked on my office door late one Thursday afternoon, looking uncharacteristically serious. "Mother, we need to talk." "Of course, dear. What's on your mind?" She closed the door behind her and sat down across from my desk. "You've been acting strange lately. The whole family is worried about you." "Worried? How thoughtful. What exactly are they worried about?" "You missed 3 Sunday dinners in a row. You're being secretive about phone calls and meetings. You're questioning every business decision we make. And yesterday, Marcus saw you having lunch with someone from Harrison and Associates." I raised an eyebrow. "Marcus is having me followed now?" "Don't be dramatic. He recognized their logo on the guy's business card when you left it on the restaurant table." "Mother, please tell me you're not thinking of selling the company." The direct question hung in the air between us. I could have lied, could have bought myself more time to finalize the arrangements. But suddenly I realized I didn't want to hide anymore. I wanted them to know exactly what was coming. "Why would that concern you?" I asked. "You've made it clear that your job here is just a paycheck to you. Surely someone with your talent could find employment elsewhere." Diana's face went pale. "Are you serious? You're actually considering selling Gray Industries?" "I'm not considering it. I've already agreed to terms. The sale will be finalized in 2 weeks." She stared at me in shock. "But this is our family business. This is our legacy. You can't just sell it without consulting us." "Actually, I can. I own 100% of the company's stock. You 3 are employees, not partners. I don't need your permission to make business decisions. But what about our jobs? What about our futures? We've built our careers here. I leaned back in my chair, studying her panicked expression. I thought your career was built on your fashion design talent, not on nepotism. Surely you'll have no trouble finding another position in marketing. Mother, you know it's not that simple. Our resumes show 20 years at the same company. No one's going to want to hire us. They'll assume we were just riding on your coattails. Weren't you? I asked quietly. The question hit her like a slap. Diana's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to sputter. How can you say that? We've worked hard for this company. Have you? Because from where I sit, it looks like you've spent the last few years coasting on the foundation I built, while treating me like an inconvenience. You told me I had nothing to offer you except money. Well, congratulations. Soon I won't even have that to offer. Diana's eyes filled with tears. We didn't mean it like that. We were just frustrated. You can be very controlling sometimes, and we felt like we needed some independence. Independence? I laughed coldly. You mean the independence to commit tax fraud using my name? The independence to steal proprietary software for personal profit? The independence to use company funds for personal expenses? That kind of independence? She looked genuinely shocked that I knew about their various indiscretions. You've been spying on us? I've been doing my job as the owner of this company. The fact that you consider basic oversight spying tells me everything I need to know about your work ethic. Diana stood up abruptly, her tears turning to anger. I'm telling Marcus and Tommy about this. We're not going to let you destroy our lives just because you're having some kind of midlife crisis at 72. It's not a midlife crisis, I said calmly. It's an end-of-life awakening. I'm finally seeing my children for who they really are, instead of who I hoped they would become. She stormed out of my office, slamming the door behind her. Within minutes, I could hear heated whispers and urgent phone calls coming from the 3 offices down the hall. The cat was out of the bag now, and I found myself looking forward to their next move. I didn't have to wait long. Marcus appeared in my doorway 20 minutes later, his face flushed with indignation. Mom, what the hell do you think you're doing? Marcus stood in my doorway with his arms crossed, blocking my exit as if he could physically prevent me from making decisions about my own company. His face was red with the kind of righteous anger that only comes from having your comfortable world suddenly threatened. We need to talk. Right now. I glanced at my watch. It was nearly 6 o'clock, and the office was emptying out around us. Perfect timing for the confrontation I'd been anticipating since Diana stormed out 20 minutes earlier. Of course. Please, come in and close the door. He stepped inside and shut the door with more force than necessary, then positioned himself directly in front of my desk like a prosecutor about to deliver a closing argument. Diana told us about the sale. Please tell me this is some kind of negotiating tactic with Harrison and Associates. Because if you're serious about this, you're about to make the biggest mistake of your life. I set down my pen and folded my hands in my lap, giving him my full attention. I'm listening. Explain to me why ensuring my company continues to thrive under competent management would be a mistake. Because you're destroying our future out of spite. Marcus's voice rose to just below a shout. This company is our inheritance. It's what we've worked toward our entire adult lives. You can't just take that away because you got your feelings hurt during one honest conversation. Our inheritance, I repeated slowly. Interesting choice of words. When exactly did Gray Industries become ours? I don't recall adding your names to the corporate documents. Don't play semantic games with me, Mom. You know what I mean. We've invested 20 years of our careers in this place. We've built relationships with clients, developed new business streams, modernized the operations. This company wouldn't be what it is today without our contributions. I opened my laptop and pulled up our client retention reports from the past 5 years. Let's examine those contributions, shall we? Client satisfaction has dropped 12% since you took over business development. We've lost 4 major accounts due to missed deadlines and poor communication. Your expense reports show you've spent more time on golf courses than in client meetings. Marcus's jaw tightened. Those numbers don't tell the whole story. Business relationships take time to develop. And yes, I entertain clients on the golf course. That's how deals get made in the real world. Is that what you call the $3,000 you charged to the company last month for a weekend in the Hamptons? Client entertainment? He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. That was a legitimate business retreat. We discussed several potential deals during that trip. With your college fraternity brothers? Because that's who your credit card statements show you were dining with at that expensive steakhouse in East Hampton. The color drained from his face. You've been investigating my personal expenses? I've been reviewing company expenses, which is my responsibility as the owner. The fact that you consider company funds to be your personal slush fund is exactly why this sale is necessary. Marcus slammed his hand down on my desk, making my coffee cup rattle. You want to talk about personal expenses? Let's talk about the $200,000 renovation you did on this office last year. Let's talk about the company car you never use. Let's talk about the executive bathroom that only you have access to. I smiled coldly. All of which were purchased with my money, from my company, for my use. The difference is I'm not stealing from anyone. I'm spending my own profits on my own business. This is insane, Marcus muttered, pacing back and forth in front of my desk. You're talking like we're strangers. We're family. Everything you've built, you built for us. You said so yourself 1,000 times over the years. I built it for the people I thought you were going to become. Responsible, ethical, hardworking adults who would carry on the values your father and I tried to instill. Instead, I got 3 entitled, dishonest, ungrateful people who see me as nothing more than a source of funding. That's not fair, and you know it. We love you, Mom. We've always been grateful for everything you've done for us. Really? Because 3 weeks ago you told me I had nothing to offer except money, and that you were tired of pretending to enjoy my company. Was that love speaking? Marcus stopped pacing and looked directly at me for the first time since entering my office. We were frustrated. You have to admit, you can be overwhelming sometimes. You micromanage everything we do, you question every decision we make, you act like we're still children who can't function without your constant supervision. And whose fault is that? I asked quietly. When have any of you demonstrated that you can function independently? Marcus, you're 47 years old and you've never held a job outside this company. Diana is 45, and she's never lived more than 10 miles away from me. Tommy is 41, and he's never even tried to make it on his own. You've all been so comfortable living off my success that you never bothered to develop your own. That's not true. We chose to stay with the family business because we believed in what you were building. We wanted to be part of your legacy. My legacy? I laughed bitterly. My legacy was supposed to be teaching you how to be good people. Instead, I taught you how to be good parasites. Marcus's face went white with anger. How dare you call us parasites? We've given you the best years of our lives. We've sacrificed our own dreams to help build your empire. What dreams? What sacrifices? You've lived in luxury your entire adult lives. You drive cars worth more than most people's annual salaries. You live in houses I helped you buy. You take vacations I helped fund. What exactly have you given up? Freedom, Marcus said flatly. The freedom to make our own choices without constantly worrying about whether they'll meet with your approval. The freedom to live our own lives without having you judge every decision we make. I stared at him in amazement. Freedom. You want to talk about freedom? I gave up my freedom when your father died, and I had to work 18-hour days to keep food on the table. I gave up my freedom when I spent weekends learning tax law instead of dating or traveling or pursuing hobbies. I gave up my freedom when I turned down social opportunities, because I was too busy building something that would support all of us. Nobody asked you to do that, Marcus said coldly. You made those choices. Don't blame us for the life you chose to live. The words hit me like a physical blow. In one sentence, Marcus had dismissed 47 years of sacrifice as my personal choice, rather than acknowledging it as a gift I'd given them. This was the moment I realized that the loving mother in me was truly dead, replaced by someone harder and infinitely less forgiving. You're absolutely right, I said calmly. I made those choices. and now I'm making different ones." Before Marcus could respond, Tommy appeared in the doorway. His face was flushed and he was breathing hard, as if he'd run from his office to mine. "Mom, we need to talk about the Harrison deal. Diana told me you're planning to sell the company, but there has to be some mistake. You can't be serious about this. Please come in, close the door. It seems we're having a family meeting after all." Tommy stepped inside and Diana appeared behind him, her eyes red from crying. The three of them arranged themselves in front of my desk like defendants awaiting sentencing, which wasn't far from the truth. "I'll make this simple," I said. "The sale of Gray Industries to Harrison and Associates will be finalized in exactly 10 days. The transition period will last 30 days, during which you'll all be expected to train your replacements and transfer your client relationships. After that, your employment here will be terminated." "But what about severance packages?" Diana asked in a small voice. "What about our pension plans? What about health insurance?" "You'll receive the minimum severance required by law based on your years of service. Your pension plans will transfer to your new employers, assuming you find new employers. As for health insurance, you'll need to arrange your own coverage through COBRA or new employment." Tommy looked like he'd been slapped. "Mom, this is crazy. You can't just throw us out on the street after 20 years. We have mortgages, car payments, expenses. Our whole financial lives are built around working here. Then perhaps you should have thought about that before you decided I was useless to you." "We never said you were useless," Diana protested. "We said we were tired of pretending to enjoy family dinners. That's completely different." "Is it? Because it sounded to me like you were saying that my company was the only thing about me you valued, and even that came with too many strings attached. So I'm removing the strings. All of them." Marcus stepped forward, his expression shifting from anger to something that might have been desperation. "Look, if this is about the tax thing, we can fix that. We'll file amended returns, pay back whatever we owe. It was a stupid mistake, but it's not worth destroying the family business over. The tax fraud was just the final straw, Marcus. This is about years of disrespect, dishonesty, and entitlement. This is about you stealing from the company, Diana using business funds for personal expenses, and Tommy taking proprietary software to start his own competing business." Tommy's face went white. "How did you find out about that?" "I've known for months. I've been documenting everything, waiting to see if any of you would come clean on your own. You never did. Because we knew you'd overreact exactly like this," Tommy said defensively. "Every mistake becomes a federal case with you. Every small problem becomes a reason to question our entire character." "Small problems?" I pulled out a file folder I'd been preparing for weeks. "Let's review the magnitude of these, quote, as small problems, shall we? Marcus, you've submitted fraudulent expense reports totaling over $50,000 in the past 2 years. Diana, you've used the company credit card for personal purchases worth $38,000. Tommy, the software you stole represents approximately $200,000 in development costs and intellectual property." I spread the documentation across my desk like playing cards. Bank statements, credit card receipts, expense reports, software licensing agreements, email exchanges. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Combined, you've stolen nearly $300,000 from this company. From me? Your own mother. The room fell silent except for the sound of Diana's quiet crying. Marcus and Tommy stared at the documents as if they could will them out of existence. "It wasn't stealing," Marcus said weakly. "It was. We were taking advances on our future inheritance. Future inheritance that you've now ensured you'll never receive." Diana looked up from her tissues. "What do you mean?" I opened another file folder, this one containing copies of my new estate planning documents. "I've restructured my entire will. The Robert Gray Memorial Foundation will receive 80% of my assets. Various scholarship funds will receive 15%. The three of you will receive the minimum required by law to prevent you from contesting the will, $1 each. The silence that followed was deafening. I could actually see the moment when the full implications hit each of them. Diana's mouth fell open. Tommy's hands started shaking. Marcus gripped the back of a chair so hard his knuckles turned white. "You can't be serious," Marcus whispered. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." "But that's $40 million, Diana said in a strangled voice. "You're giving away $40 million to strangers instead of your own children?" "I'm giving it to people who will appreciate it and use it to make a positive difference in the world. People who understand the value of hard work and ethical behavior. People who won't see it as an entitlement they're owed simply for existing." Tommy found his voice. "This is financial abuse. You're using money as a weapon to punish us for having normal family conflicts. No court in the world would uphold a will like that. Actually, they would. I've had it reviewed by 3 different estate attorneys. It's completely legal and ironclad. And before you get any ideas about having me declared incompetent, I've also undergone psychological evaluation by a court-approved psychiatrist who's confirmed my mental fitness." Marcus looked like he was about to be sick. "Mom, please. You're talking about destroying 3 families. I have 2 kids who are counting on their college funds. Diana has student loans she's still paying off. Tommy just bought a house. We all have financial obligations based on the assumption that we'd eventually inherit a portion of your estate. The same way I had financial obligations when your father died, and I had to figure out how to support 3 children on a secretary's salary. The difference is I didn't sit around waiting for someone else to solve my problems. I created solutions." "That was different," Diana said. "You didn't have a choice. We've built our entire adult lives around this family business. We've never known anything else." "Then it's time you learned. You're all intelligent, educated adults. You'll figure it out, just like I did." Tommy stood up abruptly. "This is insane. You're having some kind of breakdown. Normal mothers don't disown their children over petty disagreements. Normal children don't commit fraud using their mother's name. Normal children don't steal from the business that supports them. Normal children don't tell their mother she has nothing to offer except money." "We were angry," Marcus said desperately. "People say things they don't mean when they're angry. You've said harsh things to us over the years, too. Should we have disowned you for that?" "What harsh things?" I asked. Marcus scrambled for examples. "You told Tommy his business ideas were impractical. You told Diana her boyfriends were fortune hunters. You told me I was irresponsible with money." All of which turned out to be true. Tommy's business ideas were impractical until he stole my software to make them work. Diana's boyfriends were fortune hunters, as evidenced by how quickly they disappeared when she stopped picking up restaurant tabs. And you are irresponsible with money, as evidenced by the fraudulent expense report sitting on my desk. Diana wiped her eyes and looked at me with something approaching hatred. "You really think you're perfect, don't you? You think you never made any mistakes as a mother?" "Of course I made mistakes. My biggest mistake was spoiling you so thoroughly that you never learned to appreciate what you had. My second biggest mistake was enabling your bad behavior for so long that you thought there would never be consequences." "So this is our consequence?" Tommy asked. "Losing our jobs, our inheritance, our financial security? All because we hurt your feelings?" "No," I said quietly. "This is the natural result of your choices. I'm not taking anything away from you. I'm simply stopping giving you things you never appreciated in the first place." Marcus sat down heavily, his face in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were red with unshed tears. "Mom, I'm begging you, don't do this. We can fix this. We can be better. Just give us a chance to prove that we've learned from our mistakes." For a moment, looking at my eldest son's desperate face, I felt a flicker of the old maternal instinct. The part of me that had kissed scraped knees and soothed hurt feelings wanted to comfort him, to tell him everything would be okay. But then I remembered his cold dismissal of my sacrifices. I remembered his willingness to commit fraud, to avoid paying his ex-wife a fair settlement. I remembered his smug assumption that I would always be there to clean up his messes. It's too late for that, Marcus. The paperwork has been filed. The foundation has been established. The sale is moving forward. These aren't threats or negotiating tactics. They're done deals. Diana stood up so quickly her chair fell over backward. You're a monster. You raised us to depend on you. And then you're pulling the rug out from under us just to prove a point. What kind of mother does that? The kind who finally realized her children see her as an ATM instead of a human being. Because that's what you taught us to see, Diana screamed. Every problem we ever had, you solved with money. Every accomplishment we ever achieved, you rewarded with money. Every holiday, every birthday, every milestone was marked with expensive gifts. You never taught us to value anything except financial success because that's all you ever valued yourself. The accusation stung because there was truth in it. I had used money to show love, partly because I'd been too busy working to show it in other ways, and partly because I'd grown up poor and wanted to give my children everything I'd never had. You're right, I said calmly. I did teach you to value money over relationships. I taught you that financial security was the most important thing in life. I taught you that hard work and sacrifice were necessary to achieve success. What I failed to teach you was gratitude, respect, and basic human decency. Those were apparently not lessons you were interested in learning. Tommy laughed bitterly. Gratitude? You want gratitude? Fine. Thank you, Mom, for working so hard that we barely saw you growing up. Thank you for being so focused on building your empire that you missed most of our childhood milestones. Thank you for teaching us that money matters more than family. Is that the gratitude you're looking for? No, I said quietly. The gratitude I was looking for was acknowledgement that I sacrificed my youth, my social life, my chance at happiness to ensure you three never wanted for anything. The gratitude I was looking for was respect for the values I tried to instill in you. The gratitude I was looking for was honesty instead of theft, appreciation instead of entitlement. Well, congratulations, Marcus said, standing up. You've made your point. We're ungrateful, dishonest, entitled children who don't deserve your love or your money. Message received. I hope you're happy when you're sitting alone in your mansion with your charitable tax deductions for company. I will be, I said simply. The three of them filed out of my office without another word, leaving me alone with the scattered documents and the silence. Through my window, I could see them in the parking lot, huddled together in what was clearly an emergency strategy session. Marcus was gesturing wildly, Diana was crying again, and Tommy was pacing back and forth while talking rapidly on his phone. I gathered up the evidence of their various frauds and locked it in my office safe. Tomorrow, I would turn copies over to our accounting firm for their records and to the IRS for their investigation. Tonight, I would go home to my empty mansion and eat dinner alone while my children presumably plotted their next move. But I wasn't worried about their plots. I'd spent weeks preparing for every possible contingency, every legal challenge they might attempt, every emotional manipulation they might try. I had the law on my side, the documentation to prove my case, and the psychological evaluation to demonstrate my competence. More importantly, I had something I hadn't felt in years: peace. For the first time since Robert died, I was making decisions based on what I wanted rather than what my children needed. I was finally free to live the rest of my life on my own terms, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could give them. The next morning, I arrived at the office early to find Marcus already there, sitting in the reception area with a man I didn't recognize. The stranger was well-dressed, probably in his 50s, with the kind of confident bearing that suggested he was accustomed to being taken seriously. Mom, Marcus said, standing as I approached. This is David Brennan. He's a family law attorney. We need to discuss the situation. I nodded politely to the attorney. Mr. Brennan, I assume my son has explained our family dynamics to you? He has, Mrs. Gray. And, I have to say, I'm concerned about the drastic nature of the decisions you're making. Family disputes often seem insurmountable in the heat of the moment, but with proper mediation, most conflicts can be resolved. I appreciate your perspective, Mr. Brennan, but this isn't a dispute. It's a consequence. My children have made their feelings about me perfectly clear, and I'm simply responding accordingly. Mrs. Gray, cutting your children out of your will entirely is an extreme response to what sounds like a normal family disagreement. Have you considered the possibility that you might be acting hastily? I smiled at him pleasantly. Mr. Brennan, have you reviewed the documentation my son provided regarding their financial misconduct? The tax fraud, the embezzlement, the theft of intellectual property. The attorney glanced at Marcus, who was suddenly studying his shoes with great interest. He mentioned there were some irregularities in business expenses, but families often have informal arrangements when it comes to shared resources. $300,000 in stolen funds isn't an informal arrangement. It's a felony. Mr. Brennan's confident expression wavered slightly. Perhaps we could discuss a settlement that would address those concerns while preserving family relationships. The only settlement I'm interested in is the one that ensures my assets go to people who will use them ethically and appreciate them properly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. I walked past them toward my office, but Marcus called after me. Mom, wait. David has some ideas about how we can work this out. Family mediation, counseling, gradual reconciliation. We don't have to be enemies. I turned around slowly. Marcus, we're not enemies. Enemies usually have some respect for each other's capabilities. You see me as a resource to be managed, not a person to be respected. That's much worse than being enemies. Throughout the morning, I could hear hushed conversations and phone calls coming from the offices down the hall. Diana arrived around 10 with her own attorney in tow. Tommy showed up just before lunch with what appeared to be a financial advisor. They were clearly marshaling their forces for whatever legal challenge they were planning. I wasn't concerned. Richard had warned me this would happen and had prepared accordingly. Every document had been reviewed by multiple attorneys. Every asset transfer had been structured to avoid legal challenges. Every psychological evaluation had been conducted to the highest professional standards. Around 2 o'clock, Diana knocked on my office door. She was dressed more formally than usual and had clearly been crying, but her expression was determined. Mother, may I come in? Of course. She sat down across from my desk and folded her hands in her lap, a gesture that reminded me painfully of the little girl she'd once been when she needed to ask for something important. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about us not appreciating what we had, about taking things for granted. I waited for her to continue. You're right. We did take you for granted. We got so comfortable with having your support that we forgot how hard you worked to provide it. And we said some cruel things that we didn't really mean. Didn't you? Because they sounded very much like things you'd been thinking for a long time. Diana's composure cracked slightly. We were frustrated. You have to understand, it's hard being your child sometimes. You're so successful, so accomplished, so perfect at everything you do. We've always felt like we could never measure up to your standards. My standards were never about perfection, Diana. They were about honesty, respect, and basic human decency. Those aren't unreasonable expectations. No, they're not, and we failed to meet them. But does that really mean we deserve to lose everything? Our jobs? Our inheritance? Our relationship with you? I studied her face, looking for some sign of genuine remorse versus tactical manipulation. What exactly are you asking me, Diana? I'm asking for a chance to prove that we can be better. I know we've made mistakes, but we're your children. Doesn't that count for something? Being my children is exactly why this hurts so much. If you were strangers who had stolen from me and lied to me, I could simply press charges and move on. But you're my children, which means I trusted you, loved you, and sacrificed for you in ways I never would have for anyone else. That makes your betrayal infinitely worse, not better. Diana's carefully controlled expression finally broke, and she started crying in earnest. Please, Mom. I know we hurt you, but this punishment doesn't fit the crime. You're destroying our entire lives over one bad conversation and some questionable business expenses. Diana, look at me. She wiped her eyes and met my gaze. Do you honestly believe that your behavior toward me over the past few years has been acceptable? Do you truly think that stealing from my company, lying on your tax returns, and treating me like an inconvenience constitutes loving family behavior? She was quiet for a long moment. No, she finally whispered. No, it wasn't acceptable. Then you understand why I can't simply pretend it never happened. But there has to be a middle ground. Some way to make amends without losing everything. I leaned forward, my voice gentle but firm. Diana, what would making amends look like to you? We could pay back the money we took. We could file corrected tax returns. We could go to family counseling. We could sign agreements promising to behave better in the future. And then what? We'd go back to the way things were, with you working here because you couldn't find jobs elsewhere, coming to Sunday dinners out of obligation, and resenting me for every rule or expectation I set? It wouldn't be like that. We've learned our lesson. Have you? Because yesterday you were arguing that your theft wasn't really theft, just informal family arrangements. Today you're calling it a mistake that deserves forgiveness. Tomorrow, if I gave you another chance, what would prevent you from deciding it was justified because I was being too controlling again? Diana didn't have an answer for that. The truth is, Diana, I don't trust you anymore. Any of you. Trust is like fine china. Once it's broken, you can glue it back together, but it's never as strong as it was before. And you three didn't just chip my trust, you shattered it completely. She stood up slowly, her shoulders sagging with defeat. So that's it? There's nothing we can do to change your mind? There's nothing you can do to change what you've already done. And based on yesterday's conversation, there's nothing you want to do to change who you are. After Diana left, I called Richard to give him an update on the family's legal maneuvering. They've all hired attorneys, I told him. I expect we'll be hearing from them soon. Are you prepared for a drawn-out legal battle? They're going to challenge everything: your competence, the validity of the documents, the fairness of the asset distribution. Let them. We've covered all the bases. The psychological evaluation is bulletproof, the documentation is comprehensive, and the asset transfers are completely legal. What about the personal cost? This is going to be ugly, Bernie. They're going to air every family secret, every private moment, every perceived slight. Are you ready for that level of public scrutiny? I thought about the question seriously. Was I prepared to have my parenting dissected in court? Was I ready to have my children testify about my flaws and failures? Was I willing to endure the public humiliation of having our family dysfunction displayed for the world to see? Richard, I've spent 50 years protecting my children from the consequences of their actions. I've covered for their mistakes, made excuses for their behavior, and enabled their worst instincts because I thought that's what loving mothers were supposed to do. If the price of finally holding them accountable is some public embarrassment, then so be it. All right. Then we'll be ready for whatever they throw at us. That evening, I was at home reviewing foundation applications when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Tommy standing on my front porch, looking more serious than I'd seen him since he was a teenager. Can we talk? Without lawyers, without other people, just you and me? I stepped aside to let him in. He followed me into the living room and sat down on the edge of the sofa, his hands clasped tightly together. Mom, I need you to help me understand something. What happened to us? When did we become people you could disown without a second thought? The question caught me off guard with its directness. You didn't become those people, Tommy. You always were those people. I just finally stopped making excuses for you. That's not true. We weren't always dishonest or ungrateful. We used to be a real family. When? Give me a specific example of when we were a real family. Tommy thought for a moment. Remember when I was in high school and I wanted to start that computer repair business? You helped me set it up, taught me about business licenses and tax obligations, let me use the garage as my workshop. That was real. I remembered. Tommy had been 16 and obsessed with computers, which were still relatively new technology at the time. He'd convinced me to let him start a small repair service for neighbors and local businesses. I remember. You made almost $3,000 that summer and were so proud of earning your own money. Exactly. I was proud because I'd accomplished something on my own. You guided me, but you didn't do it for me. I felt like I was contributing to the family instead of just taking from it. So what changed? Tommy was quiet for a long time. I think it was when I graduated college and you offered me a job at Gray Industries. The salary was more than I could have made anywhere else. The benefits were incredible, and I didn't have to go through the stress of job interviews or proving myself to strangers. You're saying I made it too easy for you. I'm saying you made it unnecessary for me to grow up. Why struggle to build my own career when I could have a comfortable position handed to me? Why develop my own professional reputation when I could coast on yours? Why learn to handle difficult clients when you'd always step in to smooth things over? I felt a stab of recognition. And the others? Same thing. Marcus never had to learn real leadership skills because you were always there to back up his decisions. Diana never had to develop her own artistic vision because she knew the family business would always have a place for her marketing ideas, no matter how impractical they were. So you're saying this is my fault. I'm saying we enabled each other. You enabled our dependence because it made you feel needed, and we enabled your control because it made our lives easier. But somewhere along the way, we stopped being a family and became a business arrangement. Tommy's analysis was more insightful than anything his siblings had offered, and infinitely more honest. But it also made me sadder, because it suggested he understood exactly what had gone wrong, but had done nothing to fix it. If you understood all this, why didn't you do something about it? Why didn't you leave the company and build your own career? Why didn't you insist on paying your own way instead of letting me subsidize your lifestyle? Because it was comfortable. Because change is scary. Because I convinced myself that someday I'd prove myself worthy of your support, instead of just accepting it out of laziness. And now? Tommy looked directly at me. Now I realize that someday never comes if you don't make it come. And I realize that you were never going to stop enabling us because you didn't know how to show love any other way. His words hit me harder than anything Marcus or Diana had said. You think I don't know how to love without giving money? But if we succeed, if we manage to become the people you raised us to be, then maybe we can rebuild our relationship on a foundation that's stronger than money. I studied my youngest son's face, looking for signs of manipulation or false sincerity. But what I saw was something I hadn't seen from any of my children in years. Genuine remorse, coupled with realistic self-assessment. Tommy, what you're describing would take years. You're asking me to gamble my remaining time on Earth on the possibility that you three might eventually grow up. I'm asking you to give us a chance to prove that the values you tried to teach us actually took root, even if it took us too long to let them grow. I was quiet for a long time, weighing his words against my anger and disappointment. Even if I wanted to give you that chance, how could I trust that your newfound maturity isn't just another manipulation? How could I be sure you're not just saying what you think I want to hear? You couldn't be sure. You'd have to take it on faith, the same way you took it on faith for 47 years that we'd eventually become worth the investment you made in us. And that faith turned out to be misplaced, I finished quietly. Tommy nodded slowly. Yes, it did. But that doesn't mean it was worthless. Everything you taught us about work ethic, integrity, and responsibility is still there, buried under years of laziness and entitlement. We just need to dig it out. And what if you can't? What if the damage is too deep? Then you'll have lost nothing by giving us the chance, because you're already planning to lose us anyway. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Robert had planted so many years ago. The roses were finally succumbing to the October frost, their petals scattered across the lawn like confetti after a wedding. But their root systems were still strong, still alive beneath the surface, waiting for spring to bloom again. Tommy, I need you to understand something. I'm not angry because you disappointed me. I'm angry because you betrayed me. There's a difference between falling short of expectations and actively choosing to deceive someone who trusted you. I know. And I know that betrayal can't be undone with apologies or promises. It can only be healed with time and consistent action. Time I may not have. Time none of us are guaranteed. But the question is whether you want to spend whatever time you do have nursing your anger or giving love one more chance to win. I turned back to face him. That's a beautiful sentiment, Tommy. But love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's enabling. And I've already spent 50 years enabling behavior that ultimately destroyed my relationships with all of you. then don't enable us. Hold us to higher standards than you ever have before. Make us earn every bit of trust we want back. But don't give up on us completely. Before I could respond, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus's number. Mom, you need to get down to the office right now. Something's happened with the Harrison deal. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my office conference room with Marcus, Diana, Tommy, and two men I didn't recognize. One was clearly another attorney, but the other man had the polished appearance of a corporate executive. Mom, Marcus said, this is James Harrison from Harrison & Associates. He wanted to meet with you personally before finalizing the acquisition. I shook hands with Mr. Harrison, immediately sensing something was off about this impromptu meeting. Mr. Harrison, I thought all the terms had been agreed upon. Is there a problem with the paperwork? Harrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. No problem with the paperwork, Mrs. Gray, but I've received some concerning information about the company's financial stability that I need to discuss with you. I felt a chill run down my spine. What kind of information? It's come to my attention that there may be significant irregularities in your books. Embezzlement, fraudulent expense reports, misappropriation of company resources. My due diligence team is recommending we postpone the acquisition until these issues can be thoroughly investigated. I looked at my 3 children, who were all studiously avoiding eye contact. And where did this information come from? The attorney spoke up. That's not really relevant, Mrs. Gray. What matters is that Harrison & Associates can't move forward with purchasing a company that may be under investigation for financial crimes. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. My children had sabotaged their own inheritance by sabotaging the sale of the company. In their desperation to prevent me from liquidating my assets, they'd provided evidence of their own theft to the buyers, not realizing it would kill the deal entirely. Mr. Harrison, I said calmly, the irregularities you're referring to involve my children's misuse of company funds. I have complete documentation of every fraudulent transaction, and I was planning to address these issues after the sale was completed. If you'd like, I can provide you with a full accounting right now. Harrison looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Gray, with all due respect, family businesses often have complex internal arrangements that can appear irregular to outside observers. But the fact remains that my company can't take on the liability of acquiring a business with unresolved financial discrepancies. I understand. In that case, I'll need to explore other options for disposing of my assets. Marcus leaned forward urgently. Mom, maybe this is a sign that we should reconsider the whole thing. Maybe we should keep the company in the family and work through our problems together. I almost laughed at the transparent manipulation. Marcus, you just torpedoed a $12 million sale to prevent me from liquidating my assets. Did you think I wouldn't figure out that you were the source of Mr. Harrison's concerns? Diana's face went white. We didn't know it would kill the deal. We thought they'd just renegotiate the price or ask for guarantees or something. You thought you could manipulate the situation to your advantage without considering the consequences. Just like you've done your entire adult lives. Tommy spoke up quietly. We panicked. We saw everything we'd counted on disappearing, and we made a desperate move. A desperate move that just cost all of us $12 million and destroyed the company's reputation in the process. Congratulations. You've managed to ensure that Gray Industries is now unsellable. The attorney cleared his throat. Actually, Mrs. Gray, there may be other buyers interested in the company once these financial issues are resolved. The business itself appears to be quite valuable. Not anymore, I said flatly. Word travels fast in this industry. By tomorrow morning, every potential buyer will know that Gray Industries is under investigation for embezzlement. No one will touch us with a 10-foot pole. Harrison stood up, looking genuinely apologetic. Mrs. Gray, I'm sorry this didn't work out. Your company has an excellent reputation, and I hope you're able to resolve these family matters. After Harrison and his attorney left, I sat alone with my 3 children in the conference room that had hosted hundreds of successful business meetings over the years. The silence was deafening. Well, I said finally, I hope destroying the sale was worth it, because you've just ensured that none of us will see a penny from this company. Marcus found his voice first. We can fix this. We can issue public statements clarifying the situation. We can provide documentation showing that the irregularities were internal family matters, not criminal activity. And who exactly is going to believe those statements? You've just demonstrated that you're willing to lie to potential buyers about your own company. Why would anyone trust anything you say now? Diana was crying again. We didn't mean for this to happen. We were just trying to protect our family. You were trying to protect your meal ticket. There's a difference. Tommy slammed his hand down on the conference table. Okay, yes, we screwed up. We made a huge mistake. But getting angry about it isn't going to fix anything. We need to figure out what to do now. What to do now? I repeated. Now we watch Gray Industries slowly die because its own employees sabotaged its sale. Now we explain to our clients why their business is associated with a company under investigation for fraud. Now we figure out how to keep the lights on while our reputation crumbles around us. Marcus looked desperate. There has to be something we can do, some way to salvage this. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the parking lot where Harrison's expensive sedan was pulling away. There is something we can do. We can face the consequences of our actions like adults. What does that mean? I turned back to face them. It means I'm shutting down Gray Industries effective immediately. We'll fulfill our existing client obligations and then close the doors permanently. The announcement hit them like a physical blow. Diana gasped. Marcus went pale, and Tommy actually staggered backward. You can't be serious, Marcus whispered. I'm completely serious. This company's reputation is destroyed. Even if we could find buyers now, they'd lowball us to account for the scandal. We'd be lucky to get half of what Harrison was offering. But what about our employees? Deanna asked. What about our clients? What about our responsibilities? Our employees will receive severance packages and assistance finding new positions. Our clients will be transitioned to other firms. As for our responsibilities, we should have thought about those before we decided to sabotage our own business. Tommy sat down heavily. Mom, this is insane. You're talking about destroying 50 years of work because we made one mistake. One mistake? I laughed bitterly. Tommy, this isn't one mistake. This is the final mistake in a long series of mistakes that started the day you three decided I was too stupid to notice your theft and too weak to do anything about it. Over the next 3 days, I worked with Richard to develop a plan for shutting down Gray Industries in an orderly fashion. We would honor all existing contracts, provide our clients with recommendations for other firms, and offer our employees generous severance packages plus job placement assistance. The process was heartbreaking. I'd spent nearly 5 decades building this company from nothing, and now I was methodically dismantling it piece by piece. But every time I felt a pang of regret, I reminded myself why this was necessary. My children had forced this choice by their own actions. Marcus, Diana, and Tommy spent those 3 days in a state of shocked disbelief, as if they couldn't quite process that their comfortable world was disappearing. They made half-hearted attempts to convince me to reconsider, but their hearts weren't really in it. I think they finally understood that they'd pushed me past the point of no return. On Thursday morning, I called a company-wide meeting to announce the closure. The conference room was packed with employees who'd been with us for years, some of whom I'd hired straight out of college and watched grow into seasoned professionals. I know this comes as a shock, I began, and I want you to know that this decision has nothing to do with your performance or the quality of work you've done here. Gray Industries has been an incredible success because of your dedication and talent. Sarah Jenkins, our head of accounting, raised her hand. Mrs. Gray, is this because of the rumors about financial irregularities? Because if there are problems, surely they can be resolved without closing the entire company. I glanced at my children, who were sitting in the back of the room looking like defendants awaiting sentencing. The financial irregularities you've heard about involve misuse of company funds by family members. While these issues could technically be resolved, they've damaged our reputation to the point where continued operation is no longer viable. The room erupted in whispers and shocked expressions. David Chen, our senior software developer, spoke up. Are you saying that Marcus, Diana, and Tommy stole from the company? I'm saying that company funds were improperly used for personal expenses by multiple family members over an extended period. The details are being reviewed by our attorneys and accountants. Marcus stood up from the back of the room, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Mom, this isn't necessary. You don't need to air our family problems in front of the whole company." "Actually, I do. These people deserve to know why they're losing their jobs. They deserve to understand that their unemployment is a direct result of your actions, not their performance." Diana was crying openly now. "Please stop. You're humiliating us. You humiliated yourselves when you chose to steal from the company that employed you and provided for your families." The meeting continued for another hour as I outlined the timeline for closure, the severance packages, and the job placement assistance we'd be providing. By the end, most of our employees were angry at my children rather than at me, which was exactly what I'd intended. That afternoon, I received a call from Jennifer, Marcus's ex-wife. "Bernie, I heard about what happened with the company. I'm so sorry." "Thank you, Jennifer. I'm sorry you're hearing about our family problems secondhand. Actually, that's why I'm calling. I wanted you to know that I don't blame you for any of this. I know how Marcus can be when he doesn't get his way." I was touched by her support. "How are you managing? I know the divorce settlement wasn't as generous as it should have been." "I'm doing fine. I went back to school and got my nursing degree. I'm working at Hartford Hospital now, and I love it. It's the first time in years that I felt like I was accomplishing something on my own merit, rather than just being Marcus's wife. I'm proud of you for building an independent life for yourself." "Bernie, can I ask you something? Do you really think there's no way to reconcile with the kids? I know they've made terrible mistakes, but they're still your children." I was quiet for a moment, considering how to respond. "Jennifer, let me ask you something. During your marriage to Marcus, how many times did you give him second chances? How many times did you forgive behavior that you knew was unacceptable because you hoped he'd change?" "Too many times to count. And what did that teach him? That there were no real consequences for treating me badly." "Exactly. I've been giving my children second chances their entire adult lives. I've forgiven theft, dishonesty, disrespect, and cruelty, because I kept hoping they'd eventually grow up and appreciate what they had. But all I really taught them was that they could treat me however they wanted without facing real consequences." "So this is about teaching them consequences? This is about finally acknowledging that some damage can't be repaired. Some trust, once broken, can't be rebuilt. Some relationships, once poisoned, can't be healed." Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "I understand. I really do. But I also know how much you love them, despite everything they've done. Are you sure you're prepared to live with this decision for the rest of your life?" "I'm sure I can't live with the alternative. I won't spend my remaining years being disrespected and taken advantage of by people who see me as nothing more than a source of funding." After I hung up, I sat in my empty office looking at the photos on my desk. Pictures of my children at various ages, graduation ceremonies, family vacations, company celebrations. In every photo, they were smiling, happy, surrounded by the luxury and security I'd provided for them. But those smiles had been lies, hadn't they? Or at least, they'd been conditional on my continued usefulness to them. The moment I'd stopped being a useful provider and started being an inconvenient person with feelings and expectations, those smiles had disappeared. On Friday, I received an unexpected visitor. Mary Patterson had been Robert's sister, and she'd maintained a relationship with our family even after his death. She was now in her 80s and lived in a retirement community in Hartford, but she'd driven herself to my office to see me. "Bernie, dear, I heard about what's happening with the company. I wanted to check on you." I invited her into my office and poured her a cup of tea from the service I kept for special occasions. Mary had always been a straight shooter, someone who said what she meant without sugarcoating. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I'm fine, Mary." Disappointed, but fine. "And the children?" "The children are learning that actions have consequences." Mary studied my face carefully. "You know, Robert used to worry about this." "About what?" "About you spoiling those kids too much. He thought you were compensating for his death by trying to be both mother and father, provider and nurturer. He worried that you were making their lives too easy." I felt a stab of pain at the mention of Robert's concerns. "He never said anything to me about that. He didn't want to add to your stress. You were working so hard to keep everything together after he died. But he used to tell me that children need to struggle a little to develop character, and that you were preventing them from experiencing the kind of challenges that would help them grow. So you think this is my fault for spoiling them? I think this is the result of good intentions that went too far. You wanted to give them everything you never had, but in doing so, you prevented them from appreciating anything they did have. Mary sipped her tea thoughtfully. But I also think you're right to hold them accountable now. Better late than never. Even if it means losing them permanently. Bernie, you lost them years ago. You just didn't want to admit it. Those 3 people who work here aren't really your children anymore. They're employees who happen to share your DNA. Your real children, the ones you raised with love and values, would never have treated you the way these 3 have. The truth of her words hit me like a physical blow. So what am I supposed to do? Give up on them completely? You're supposed to do what Robert would have done. You're supposed to love them enough to let them face the consequences of their choices, even if those consequences are painful. And if they never learn, if they never change. Mary reached across the desk and patted my hand. Then at least you'll know you tried everything. At least you'll know you didn't enable their bad behavior one day longer than necessary. That evening, I went home to find all 3 of my children waiting in my driveway. They were standing beside Tommy's car, looking like a delegation sent to negotiate a peace treaty. Mom, Marcus said as I got out of my car, we need to talk. I think we've said everything that needs to be said. No, we haven't. We haven't said we're sorry. Really, truly sorry for everything we've done to hurt you. I studied their faces, looking for signs of sincerity versus desperation. Are you sorry for what you did, or are you sorry you got caught? Diana stepped forward. We're sorry for taking advantage of your generosity. We're sorry for treating you like an obligation instead of a person. We're sorry for saying cruel things that we didn't really mean. And we're sorry for sabotaging the Harrison deal, Tommy added. That was stupid and desperate, and we know it probably made everything worse. It didn't probably make everything worse, I said coldly. It definitely made everything worse. You destroyed a $12 million sale out of pure selfishness. Marcus looked like he was about to cry. We know, and we're prepared to face the consequences. We're prepared to pay back every penny we took from the company, with interest. We're prepared to work for free until we've made restitution. With what money? You're all about to be unemployed. We'll find other jobs. We'll sell our houses if we have to. We'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I wanted to believe them, but their track record made it impossible. And then what? After you've paid me back, after you've served your penance, then we go back to the way things were? No, Tommy said firmly. We go forward to something better. Something based on honesty and respect instead of dependence and resentment. Something that may take years to build, assuming it's even possible. Mom, Diana said softly, we know we've lost your trust. We know we've probably lost your love. But we're asking for one last chance to prove that we're capable of being the children you deserved all along. I looked at these 3 middle-aged people standing in my driveway, begging for forgiveness they'd never bothered to ask for before. Part of me wanted to believe they were sincere, that losing everything had finally shocked them into self-awareness. But a larger part of me remembered all the other times they'd seemed sorry, all the other promises they'd made and broken. Even if I wanted to give you another chance, I said, it's too late. The foundation has been established, the scholarships have been funded, the company is closing. These aren't threats I made in anger. They're legal realities that can't be undone. Marcus looked desperate. But you could establish new trusts for us. You could start a new company. I could enable you for another 20 years while you slowly learn to respect me. I could spend my remaining time on Earth hoping you'll eventually become grateful for what you have. You could give love one more chance, Diana whispered. I felt tears burning my eyes for the first time since this whole ordeal began. I gave love 47 years of chances. I gave love everything I had to give. And love wasn't enough to prevent you from stealing from me, lying to me, and treating me like a burden. Then what do we have to do? Tommy asked desperately. What would it take for you to forgive us? I looked at each of their faces, seeing echoes of the children they'd once been mixed with the disappointing adults they'd become. You want to know what it would take? It would take you accepting responsibility for your actions, without expecting forgiveness in return. It would take you learning to live independently without my financial support. It would take you proving that you can be decent human beings even when there's nothing in it for you. And if we do all that, if we prove ourselves worthy of your trust, then maybe, in time, we could have some kind of relationship. Not the one we had before, because that was built on lies and dependence. But something new. Something honest. Marcus stepped closer. How long would we have to prove ourselves? However long it takes. Months, years, maybe the rest of my life. There's no timeline for earning back trust, just like there was no timeline for destroying it. The three of them exchanged glances, and I could see them weighing their options. They could continue fighting me legally, knowing they'd probably lose. They could accept my conditions and spend years trying to prove themselves with no guarantee of success. Or they could walk away and try to build new lives without me. We'll do it, Diana said suddenly. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, we'll prove that we deserve another chance. Even if it means giving up the comfortable lives you've built on my money. Even then, Tommy nodded. We'll get real jobs, pay our own way, and show you that we can be independent adults. Marcus was the last to agree, but finally he nodded too. And we'll pay back every penny we took from the company, even if it takes decades. I wanted to feel hopeful about their commitment, but I'd heard too many promises from them over the years. Actions speak louder than words. Show me, don't tell me. As they drove away, I stood in my empty driveway, wondering if I'd just witnessed a genuine moment of growth or simply another manipulation designed to get them what they wanted. Time would tell, but either way, I'd made my position clear. The era of easy forgiveness and endless second chances was over. The next week was a blur of paperwork and logistics as we began the formal process of shutting down Gray Industries. I spent most of my time helping our employees transition to new positions and ensuring our clients were properly transferred to other firms. To my surprise, several of our longtime employees approached me privately to express their support for my decision. Sarah Jenkins told me she'd suspected the family financial irregularities for months, but hadn't felt comfortable reporting them. David Chen mentioned that he'd lost respect for my children years ago, when he'd witnessed their poor work ethic firsthand. Mrs. Gray, Sarah said, I hope you don't think less of us for not speaking up sooner about what we observed. I think less of myself for not addressing it sooner, I replied. I let family loyalty blind me to behavior I never would have tolerated from other employees. The most difficult part was watching my children try to maintain their dignity while the company collapsed around them. They showed up to work every day, fulfilling their responsibilities with a professionalism they'd rarely displayed before. But I could see the stress wearing on them as the reality of their situation became clear. Marcus had begun reaching out to his professional contacts, trying to find employment with other financial consulting firms. But word of Gray Industries' closure had spread quickly through our industry, along with whispers about why the company was shutting down. Several potential employers had already declined to interview him. Diana was exploring opportunities in marketing and graphic design, but her portfolio consisted mainly of work she'd done for Gray Industries. She was struggling to demonstrate her value to companies that didn't know her personally. Tommy was actually having the most success, probably because his technical skills were more easily transferable. He'd already had several interviews with software development companies and seemed optimistic about his prospects. 10 days after my children's driveway apology, I received a call from Marcus that surprised me. Mom, I need to tell you something. I've been offered a position with a consulting firm in Boston. Congratulations, that's excellent news. The thing is, it's a significant step down from what I was making here. The salary is about half what you were paying me, and there's no guarantee of advancement. Most people don't start new careers at the executive level, Marcus. I know, and I'm prepared to take it. But I wanted you to know that this means I'll have to sell my house. The mortgage payments are too high for my new salary level. This was the first real indication that any of my children were serious about changing their circumstances. Where will you live? I found a small apartment in Cambridge. It's nothing fancy, but it's what I can afford on my new salary. And you're okay with that? Marcus was quiet for a moment. I'm not okay with it, but I'm accepting it. There's a difference. Yes, there is. Mom, I wanted you to know that I'm not doing this to impress you or to earn points toward forgiveness. I'm doing it because I finally understand that I've been living beyond my means my entire adult life, and it's time to face reality. The honesty in his voice was something I hadn't heard in years. I'm glad you understand that. I also wanted to ask if you'd be willing to provide a professional reference for me. I know I don't deserve it after everything that's happened, but my new employer is asking for references from previous supervisors. The request caught me off guard. After everything that had happened, Marcus was still trusting me to be fair in my assessment of his work performance. What would you want me to say? The truth. That I was often lazy and entitled, but that I had good client relationships and strong analytical skills when I applied myself. That's a very honest self-assessment. I'm trying to be more honest about everything these days. I agreed to provide the reference, and true to my word, I gave an honest assessment of Marcus's strengths and weaknesses. The potential employer appreciated the candor and offered him the position. 2 weeks later, Diana called with similar news. She'd accepted a position with a small advertising agency in Hartford, making about 60% of her previous salary. She was also planning to sell her house and move into a modest rental property. The hardest part, she admitted, is explaining to my friends why I'm suddenly downsizing my lifestyle. Everyone knows something happened with the family business, but I haven't told them the details. What do you plan to tell them? The truth. That I took advantage of my mother's generosity and am now facing the consequences of my actions. That's going to be embarrassing. It should be embarrassing. What I did was embarrassing. Tommy was the last to find new employment, but when he did, it was with a tech startup that was impressed by his innovative approach to software development. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same creativity he'd used to steal my intellectual property was now helping him build a legitimate career. 3 months after Gray Industries officially closed its doors, I received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a handwritten note from Marcus. Mom, this is the first installment on what I owe you. It represents every penny of my savings after selling my house and paying off my debts. I know it's a small fraction of what I took from the company, but it's a start. I'll send more as I'm able to save it from my salary. Marcus. The check was followed a week later by another package containing a check for $3,000 from Diana and a similar note explaining that she'd sold her jewelry and designer clothes to raise the money. Tommy's contribution came in the form of a detailed proposal for a software system that would benefit the Robert Gray Memorial Foundation. He'd spent his evenings and weekends developing it as a gift, refusing any payment for his work. None of these gestures changed my fundamental position about our relationship, but they did suggest that my children were finally taking responsibility for their actions, rather than just apologizing for them. The real test came 6 months later when Diana's ex-boyfriend Michael called me out of the blue. Mrs. Gray, I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to ask you about Diana. She's been dating my brother for a few months now, and he's talking about proposing. I wanted to know if she's financially stable, because my family has some concerns about her motives. What kind of concerns? Well, we know she used to work for your family business, and we know the business closed under suspicious circumstances. My brother is pretty well off, and we're worried she might be looking for someone to support her. I could have easily confirmed his suspicions and torpedoed Diana's relationship. It would have been a perfect opportunity for revenge. Instead, I found myself defending her. Diana is working full-time at an advertising agency and supporting herself independently. She sold her house and moved into a modest apartment that she pays for with her own salary. As far as I know, she hasn't asked anyone for financial assistance since starting her new job. Oh, well, that's good to hear. We just wanted to make sure she wasn't a gold digger. After I hung up, I realized I'd just provided Diana with something I'd never given her before, a character reference based on her own merits rather than her relationship to me. It felt strange, but also satisfying. The months that followed brought a steady stream of updates from my children about their new lives. Marcus was promoted to senior consultant at his firm and was able to move into a larger apartment. Diana received recognition for a successful advertising campaign and was given additional responsibilities. Tommy's startup secured major funding and offered him equity in the company. More importantly, they were all continuing to send me payments toward their debt, even as their financial situations improved. They could have easily stopped once they realized I wasn't monitoring their progress, but they didn't. A year after the collapse of Gray Industries, I received an invitation to Marcus's wedding. He was marrying a woman named Catherine, whom he'd met at his new job. The invitation was simple and tasteful, not the elaborate affair his first wedding had been. I almost didn't attend, but something about the simplicity of the invitation suggested this was different. At the wedding, I was seated with Catherine's family rather than given any special recognition as the groom's mother. Marcus introduced me as my mother Bernie, without any mention of my business success or financial status. During the reception, Catherine approached me with a nervous smile. "Mrs. Gray, I wanted to thank you for raising such a good man." I almost choked on my champagne. I'm not sure Marcus would agree with that assessment. He's told me about the mistakes he made when he was younger, but he's also told me how those mistakes taught him what really matters in life. He works harder than anyone I know, and he never takes anything for granted. I'm glad to hear that. He talks about you all the time. He's so proud of the foundation you started and the scholarships you've funded. He says he hopes someday he'll be able to contribute to causes like that himself. I was surprised to learn that Marcus had been following my charitable work. He's been keeping track of the foundation? Oh yes. He reads every newsletter, every annual report. He says it inspires him to think about his own legacy and what kind of impact he wants to have on the world. The conversation gave me hope that perhaps my children were finally developing the values I'd tried to instill in them years earlier. But I reminded myself that people often said what they thought others wanted to hear at weddings. The real test came 2 years later when I was diagnosed with a mild heart condition that required surgery. I told no one about the diagnosis except my doctor and Richard, but somehow Diana found out and showed up at the hospital. "How did you know I was here?" I asked when she appeared in my room. "Jennifer told me. She's working here now and saw your name on the patient list. I didn't ask you to come." "I know. But I wanted to be here anyway." Diana sat down in the chair beside my bed. She looked older than her 47 years, with lines around her eyes that hadn't been there when she was living an easy life on my money. But she also looked more genuine somehow, more real. "Are you okay? Is it serious?" "It's routine surgery. I'll be fine." "I'm glad." I was scared when Jennifer told me. We sat in comfortable silence for a while. Finally, Diana spoke again. "Mom, I know you don't owe me any explanations, but I need to understand something. When you cut us out of your will, were you hoping we'd change? Or were you just done with us completely?" The question caught me off guard with its directness. I was done with the people you'd become, but I never stopped hoping you'd remember who you were raised to be. "And now? Do you think we've remembered?" I studied her face, looking for signs of the entitled, manipulative woman she'd been 3 years earlier. What I saw instead was someone who looked tired but determined. Someone who'd learned that life was harder than she'd expected, but was facing that reality with courage. "You're not the same people you were when this started," I admitted. "Whether that means you've become who you were meant to be remains to be seen." Diana nodded slowly. "Fair enough, we've got more to prove." "You don't have to prove anything to me anymore, Diana. You need to prove it to yourselves." As she was leaving, Diana paused at the door. "Mom, I know you probably won't believe this, but I'm grateful for what you did. I hated it at the time, and I hated you for a while too. But losing everything forced me to find out who I really am, underneath all the privilege and entitlement. And I like this version of myself better." After she left, I lay in my hospital bed thinking about the conversation. For the first time in years, talking to one of my children hadn't left me feeling angry or disappointed. Diana had seemed genuine, humble, and self-aware in ways she'd never been before. But I also reminded myself that people were often at their best during crises. The real test would be how she behaved when life returned to normal. The surgery went well, and I was released from the hospital 3 days later. To my surprise, I found that my house had been cleaned, and my refrigerator stocked with easy-to-prepare meals. There was no note, but I suspected Diana's involvement. Over the following weeks, I received regular check-in calls from all three of my children. They didn't ask for anything or try to leverage my health scare into reconciliation. They simply called to see how I was feeling and if I needed anything. Marcus offered to hire a housekeeper to help during my recovery. Diana volunteered to do my grocery shopping. Tommy offered to install a security system to help me feel safer living alone. All three offers were practical and thoughtful, without any strings attached or expectations of reward. I declined their help politely, but their willingness to offer it without expecting anything in return marked a significant change from the transactional relationship we'd had before. 3 years after the collapse of Gray Industries, I was invited to speak at a conference for women entrepreneurs. The topic was building sustainable family businesses. And the irony wasn't lost on me that I was being asked to share wisdom about something I'd ultimately failed at. During my speech, I talked about the importance of maintaining professional boundaries even within family businesses, the dangers of enabling bad behavior in the name of family loyalty, and the necessity of holding everyone to the same ethical standards, regardless of their relationship to you. After the presentation, a young woman approached me during the reception. "Mrs. Gray, my name is Patricia Williams. I'm 26 years old, and I just started my own accounting firm. I wanted to thank you for the scholarship that paid for my MBA." I was momentarily confused. Scholarship? The Bernice Gray Scholarship for Working-Class Students at Harvard Business School. It covered my full tuition and living expenses for 2 years. Without it, I never could have afforded graduate school. This was the first time I'd met one of my scholarship recipients in person, and I was struck by her confidence and articulate manner. "Tell me about your business," I said. "I specialize in financial consulting for small family businesses. After hearing your speech today, I realize that many of the problems my clients face are exactly what you described. Family members who feel entitled to special treatment, lack of clear boundaries between personal and business relationships, and difficulty holding relatives accountable for poor performance. How do you help them navigate those challenges?" I work with them to establish clear policies that apply to everyone equally, regardless of family relationships. I help them separate family dynamics from business decisions. And when necessary, I help them understand that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a family member is to hold them accountable for their actions. Patricia's words echoed my own hard-learned lessons, and I felt a surge of pride knowing that my scholarship money was supporting someone who truly understood the values I'd tried to instill. "Would you be interested in joining the advisory board for the Robert Gray Memorial Foundation?" I asked impulsively. "We're always looking for young entrepreneurs who can help us identify worthy scholarship candidates and grant recipients." Patricia's face lit up. "I would be honored." That conversation marked the beginning of a new phase in my life. Instead of focusing on the family I'd lost, I began investing my time and energy in the extended family of scholarship recipients, grant beneficiaries, and young entrepreneurs who were building ethical, sustainable businesses. Over the next year, I traveled to universities across the country, meeting with students who'd received Bernice Gray scholarships. I visited community centers that had received foundation grants. I mentored young business owners who were struggling with the same challenges I'd faced decades earlier. The work was fulfilling in ways I hadn't expected. These young people appreciated my guidance and wisdom in ways my own children never had. They listened to my advice, implemented my suggestions, and sent me updates on their progress with genuine gratitude. More importantly, they reminded me of who I'd been at their age, hungry, determined, and willing to work for everything I achieved. They helped me remember that success wasn't about what you could give to ungrateful recipients, but about what you could accomplish through your own efforts and integrity. During this period, my children continued their steady progress toward independence and respectability. Marcus had been promoted again and was now managing a team of junior consultants. Diana had started her own small marketing firm and was slowly building a client base. Tommy's startup had been acquired by a larger tech company, giving him financial security for the first time in his adult life. They also continued sending me payments toward their debt, even though the amounts were now substantial enough that they could have easily stopped without my noticing. Their persistence suggested that paying me back had become a matter of personal integrity rather than obligation. 4 years after our final confrontation, I received an unexpected letter from Marcus. Unlike his previous communications, which had been brief and businesslike, this one was several pages long and deeply personal. "Dear Mom," it began, I'd been wanting to write this letter for months, but I wasn't sure how to express what I needed to say. Today marks the 4th anniversary of the day you told us we had nothing to offer, except our willingness to change, and I wanted you to know how much my life has changed since then. When I first moved to Boston and started working for a fraction of my previous salary, I was angry and resentful. I felt like you'd punished us far beyond what our crimes deserved. I spent months feeling sorry for myself and blaming you for destroying our comfortable lives. But somewhere during my 2nd year here, something shifted. I started to notice how much harder my colleagues worked than I ever had at Gray Industries. I saw how grateful they were for opportunities I'd always taken for granted. I observed how they treated their supervisors with respect and appreciation, rather than entitlement and resentment. For the first time in my adult life, I was surrounded by people who'd earned everything they had through their own efforts. They didn't have family connections or financial safety nets. They'd succeeded through talent, determination, and character. And I realized that I'd never been one of those people. I'd been coasting on your success for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to accomplish something entirely on my own. When I received my first promotion here, based solely on my own performance, I felt a pride I'd never experienced during all my years as your heir apparent. I understand now why you had to cut us off. Not because you stopped loving us, but because you loved us enough to force us to discover our own capabilities. You gave us the greatest gift possible, the opportunity to respect ourselves. I know I can never undo the pain I caused you. I know that saying I'm sorry doesn't erase years of taking you for granted and treating you badly. But I want you to know that I think about you every day, and I'm grateful for everything you taught me, both through your generosity and through your refusal to enable my weakness any longer. I don't expect forgiveness or reconciliation. I'm not writing this to ask for anything. I just wanted you to know that your investment in me wasn't wasted. It just took longer to pay dividends than either of us expected. The letter continued for several more paragraphs, describing Marcus's work, his marriage, and his growing involvement in charitable causes. He mentioned that he and Catherine had established a small scholarship fund for underprivileged students. Inspired by my example, reading his words, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, genuine pride in one of my children. Not pride in their achievements or their financial success, but pride in their character and their growth as human beings. I didn't respond to the letter immediately. Instead, I filed it away and waited to see if Marcus's actions would continue to match his words. 6 months later, I received similar letters from Diana and Tommy. Diana wrote about discovering her own creative talents when she was forced to work without the safety net of family money. Tommy wrote about the satisfaction of building something meaningful rather than just profitable. All 3 letters shared common themes: gratitude for the difficult lessons they'd been forced to learn, respect for the values I'd tried to instill in them, and understanding of why I'd made the choices I'd made. But they also shared something else. None of them asked for anything. They weren't writing to rebuild our relationship or to gain access to my money. They were writing simply to express their understanding and appreciation for what I'd done. Their lack of expectation was perhaps the most convincing evidence that they'd truly changed. The old versions of my children would have used these letters as leverage to negotiate their way back into my good graces. The people who wrote these letters seemed genuinely content with their new lives and genuinely grateful for the lessons they'd learned. On my 77th birthday, I was surprised to receive a small package with no return address. Inside was a framed photograph of Robert and me from our wedding day, along with a simple note. Happy birthday, Mom. We hope you're doing well. With love, Marcus, Diana, and Tommy. The gesture was simple and tasteful, acknowledging the day without making any demands on my time or attention. More importantly, it suggested that my children had been thinking about me not as a source of money or support, but as a person worthy of birthday wishes. That same week, I received a call from Patricia Williams, who had become my unofficial liaison with the Foundation's scholarship recipients. Mrs. Gray, I have some news that I think will interest you. 3 of our scholarship recipients have just graduated and started their own businesses. But what makes this special is that they've all committed to mentoring other young entrepreneurs and contributing a percentage of their profits to educational scholarships. They're paying it forward. Exactly. And they're doing it because they understand that their success was built on the foundation of someone else's generosity. They want to create the same opportunities for others that you created for them. This was the legacy I'd always hoped to create. Not just successful businesses or wealthy children, but a cycle of generosity and mentorship that would continue long after I was gone. Patricia, I want to establish an additional fund, something that provides not just scholarships, but ongoing mentorship and business development support for young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. That's a wonderful idea. What would you like to call it? I thought for a moment about Robert, about the values he'd tried to instill in our children, about the legacy we'd both hoped to leave. The Second Chance Initiative. Because everyone deserves the opportunity to prove who they can become. Over the next year, the Second Chance Initiative grew into our foundation's most successful program. We provided not just financial support, but comprehensive mentorship, business development resources, and networking opportunities for young people who are trying to build ethical, sustainable businesses. The program attracted volunteers from across the country, successful business owners who wanted to give back, retired executives who had wisdom to share, and young professionals who understood the challenges our recipients faced. To my surprise, I learned that Marcus, Diana, and Tommy had all applied to volunteer with the program. They'd submitted applications under their married names, without mentioning their relationship to me, and had been accepted based on their qualifications and recommendations from their current employers. When Patricia told me about their involvement, I was faced with a decision. I could reject their applications to maintain our separation, or I could allow them to contribute to something meaningful, without any expectation of personal reconciliation. I chose to let them volunteer, but made it clear through Patricia that their participation didn't change our personal relationship. They were welcome to contribute their time and expertise to help other young entrepreneurs, but they shouldn't expect any special recognition or treatment because of their family connection. Their response was exactly what I'd hoped for. They threw themselves into the work with genuine enthusiasm, providing valuable mentorship to program participants without seeking any credit or acknowledgement for their efforts. Marcus worked with young consultants who were trying to build ethical practices in a competitive industry. Diana helped aspiring marketing professionals develop authentic, sustainable approaches to building their brands. Tommy mentored tech entrepreneurs who were trying to balance innovation with social responsibility. The program coordinators consistently praised their contributions, noting their professionalism, insight, and genuine commitment to helping others succeed. On my 78th birthday, instead of receiving gifts from my children, I received thank you notes from 3 young entrepreneurs who had been mentored by Marcus, Diana, and Tommy through the Second Chance Initiative. Mrs. Gray, one note read, I don't know if you're aware, but Marcus Gray has been my mentor for the past 6 months. He's helped me navigate some difficult decisions about growing my consulting business while maintaining my ethical standards. He never mentions his own background or successes. He just focuses on helping me become the best version of myself. I wanted you to know that your foundation is supported by truly exceptional volunteers. Similar notes arrived from young people who had worked with Diana and Tommy. All 3 mentioned the humility, wisdom, and genuine care their mentors had shown, without any indication that they knew about the family connection. Reading those notes, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Pride in my children that wasn't complicated by disappointment or resentment. They were using their talents and experience to help others without seeking recognition or reward. They were embodying the values Robert and I had tried to teach them, even though it had taken them until middle age to embrace those principles. That evening, I called Richard to discuss making some changes to my estate planning. I want to establish individual trust funds for Marcus, Diana, and Tommy, I told him. Richard was quiet for a moment. Bernie, are you sure about this? After everything that's happened? I'm not doing this to reward them or because I've forgiven them. I'm doing this because they've finally proven they can be trusted with money. Not because they've earned my trust, but because they've learned not to rely on it. What kind of trusts are you thinking about? Conservative investments that will provide them with modest annual incomes after I'm gone. Nothing extravagant, nothing that would allow them to stop working or return to their previous lifestyles. Just enough to provide some security in their old age. And the bulk of your estate? Still goes to the foundation and the scholarship programs. But my children have shown that they can contribute meaningfully to those efforts, so they deserve to benefit modestly from the success of the institutions they're now supporting. Richard helped me structure the trusts in a way that would provide my children with annual payments of about $50,000 each, enough to supplement their incomes without creating dependence or entitlement. More importantly, the trust documents specified that payments would continue only as long as the recipients remained employed and contributed at least 20 hours per month to charitable activities. If they stopped working or stopped giving back to their communities, the payments would cease and their portions would revert to the foundation. I didn't tell my children about the trusts. They would learn about them after my death, and by then their responses would reveal whether they'd truly internalized the values I tried to teach them, or whether they were still primarily motivated by financial gain. A few months later, I was invited to speak at the Harvard Business School about entrepreneurship and family business dynamics. During my presentation, I shared the story of Gray Industries, both its success and its ultimate failure. I built a multi-million-dollar company, I told the students, but I failed to build children who could appreciate what they'd inherited. I gave them everything money could buy, but I didn't teach them to value what they'd been given. After the presentation, a student asked, "Do you regret shutting down your company and cutting off your children?" I considered the question carefully. I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret doing it. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their worst impulses and force them to discover their own strength. Have you reconciled with your children? We found a different kind of relationship. Not the one I originally wanted, but perhaps the one we all needed. They've learned to stand on their own, and I've learned that love doesn't require you to accept unacceptable behavior. That evening, I had dinner with several scholarship recipients who were now successful professionals in the Boston area. As I listened to them talk about their businesses, their families, and their philanthropic activities, I realized that I had indeed created the legacy I'd always wanted, just not in the way I'd originally planned. These young people carried forward the values Robert and I had believed in. They worked hard, treated others with respect, and used their success to lift up others. They were the children I'd hoped to raise, even though they weren't the ones I'd given birth to. But as I sat there surrounded by their energy and optimism, I also thought about Marcus, Diana, and Tommy, quietly volunteering their time to help other young entrepreneurs, working at jobs they'd earned through their own efforts, building modest but meaningful lives based on their own capabilities rather than their inheritance. They weren't the same people who had dismissed me as useless 4 years earlier. They'd become adults I could respect, even if our relationship would never be what it once was. On the flight home to Connecticut, I found myself thinking about forgiveness. Not the easy forgiveness I'd offered too many times before, but the harder kind that acknowledges wrongdoing while still allowing for redemption. I'd spent 4 years focused on the family I'd lost. Perhaps it was time to start thinking about the family I might yet regain, not through forgetting the past, but through building something new on the foundation of hard-learned lessons. When I arrived home, I sat down at my computer and wrote 3 letters. "Dear Marcus," the first one began, "I received a thank you note from one of your mentees through the Second Chance Initiative. She spoke very highly of your guidance and professionalism. I wanted you to know that I'm proud of the work you're doing and the man you've become." The letters to Diana and Tommy were similar. Brief acknowledgments of their growth and contributions, without any suggestion of reconciliation or forgiveness. I didn't send the letters immediately. Instead, I put them in my desk drawer and waited to see if my impulse to reach out would fade with time. But as days passed, I found myself adding small details to each letter, memories of their childhood accomplishments, observations about their current character, expressions of hope for their continued growth. A week later, I finally mailed all 3 letters. The responses came quickly. Marcus called to thank me for the letter and to tell me how much my acknowledgement meant to him. Diana sent a handwritten note expressing gratitude for my recognition of her efforts. Tommy emailed a thoughtful response about the importance of second chances and the value of learning from mistakes. None of them asked for anything beyond what I'd already given, a simple acknowledgement that they'd changed and grown. Their restraint was perhaps the most convincing evidence that their transformation was genuine. 6 months later, I was diagnosed with a more serious health condition that would require ongoing treatment. This time, I didn't try to hide it from my children. When I called to tell them about the diagnosis, Their responses were immediate and practical. Marcus offered to research treatment options and specialists. Diana volunteered to coordinate appointments and manage logistics. Tommy offered to install medical alert systems and other safety equipment in my home. All three offers were focused on my well-being, rather than their own emotional needs. They didn't use my illness as an excuse to push for reconciliation or to guilt me into changing my estate plans. They simply offered practical help from adult children to their aging parent. I accepted some of their assistance. Marcus's research proved valuable in selecting my treatment team, and Tommy's safety equipment gave me peace of mind about living alone. But what impressed me most was their ability to provide support without overstepping boundaries or assuming greater intimacy than our current relationship warranted. During my first round of treatment, Diana sent weekly care packages with homemade meals and practical items I might need. The packages always included brief, cheerful notes asking about my health and offering encouragement, but never pushing for deeper connection. Marcus called every Sunday evening to check on my progress and discuss any questions I had about my treatment options. Our conversations were warm but respectful, focused on my immediate needs rather than our past conflicts. Tommy set up a simple communication system that allowed me to easily contact all three of them if I needed help, but didn't require me to explain my needs or justify my requests. Their thoughtful, restrained support gave me something I'd never had before: adult children who could be helpful without being intrusive, caring without being possessive. As my treatment progressed successfully and my health stabilized, I found myself looking forward to our limited interactions. Not because I'd forgotten their past behavior, but because I genuinely enjoyed the people they'd become. On my 79th birthday, they sent a joint gift: a leather-bound photo album containing pictures of all the scholarship recipients and grant beneficiaries I'd met over the past 5 years. Each photo was accompanied by a brief description of the person's background and achievements. The gift was perfect. It celebrated my current priorities rather than our shared past, and it required significant time and effort to compile without being expensive or elaborate. More importantly, it demonstrated that my children had been paying attention to what mattered to me now, rather than trying to recreate what had mattered to us before. As I flipped through the album, I realized that I was no longer angry with Marcus, Diana, and Tommy. I wasn't ready to fully trust them again, and I wasn't prepared to return to the close relationship we'd once had. But I was willing to acknowledge that they'd earned a place in my life as respectful, caring adults who happened to be my children. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been easy for any of us. But perhaps that was what made it meaningful. Easy changes rarely last, but changes that require sustained effort and genuine growth often do. I still believed I'd made the right decision 4 years earlier when I'd chosen to hold them accountable for their actions, rather than continuing to enable their bad behavior. But I was also grateful that the story hadn't ended there. My children had proven that people could change if they were motivated by consequences rather than rewards. They'd shown that respect had to be earned rather than assumed. And they demonstrated that love without boundaries wasn't really love at all. It was just another form of enabling. As I closed the photo album and prepared for bed, I thought about the letter I'd received from Marcus years earlier, in which he'd thanked me for loving him enough to force him to discover his own capabilities. At the time, I'd filed the letter away without responding. But now I understood what he'd meant. True love sometimes requires you to stop giving people what they want and start giving them what they need, even when what they need is the space to fail, struggle, and eventually succeed on their own terms. The scholarship recipients in the photo album had needed opportunities and financial support. My children had needed consequences and accountability. Both groups had ultimately benefited from receiving exactly what would help them grow, rather than what would make them comfortable. As I turned off the lights and settled in for the night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace with my choices and hope for the future. Not the future I'd originally planned, but the one that had emerged from the ashes of my original dreams. Tomorrow, I would continue building the foundation that had become my legacy. I would mentor young entrepreneurs who reminded me why I'd fallen in love with business in the first place. And I would maintain the careful, respectful relationship I'd rebuilt with my children. Not because I'd forgotten their failures, but because I'd finally learned to appreciate their growth. The woman who had built Gray Industries from nothing had learned one final lesson. Sometimes the greatest success comes not from holding on to what you've built, but from knowing when to let it go and build something better in its place. Up next, You've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.